Let me just summarize from the first day what we accomplished. We had a presentation from Professor Mahallati on Islamic ethics of friendship and what the Pope's visit, his various documents from Beirut to the Brotherhood, Humanity and Brotherhood document in 2019, and his meetings in Baghdad really mean in a broader picture of religious diplomacy. And Professor Mahallati outlined 3 levels of thinking for us. And in that, we understood that when it comes to friendship in Islam, there's a rich tradition, both in Quranic perspective as well as in Islamic Hadith perspective on friendship. And he argued that there is a strong chances of being at a turning point today, because what is happening in the Middle East, we're visiting today, religious leaders are stepping forward. So that was the perspective from Professor Mahallati yesterday. We will have another summary of it later. Today, we're going to focus on Christian-Jewish perspective of the Pope's visit. As many of you know, Pope Francis' historic visit to Iraq was the first visit of a Pope to that country. I believe Pope John Paul wanted to go there, but was not successful or something happened. And even during this visit, the tenacity of this Pope to go to Iraq during COVID and also have meetings face-to-face with religious leaders in Iraq and travel all the way from Baghdad to Najaf to the home of the senior Ayatollah Sistani was a significant step toward what is known as religious diplomacy. So reflecting on that trip, reflecting on the significance of that trip and how it came about, we have invited 2 speakers today. One is Reverend John Cheney, who used to be the head of the National Cathedral in Washington. I believe as a religious diplomat, he has met more political leaders than anyone on this panel right now. And he has devoted his life to interfaith dialogue and bridge building. So he's a perfect speaker for us today. And then after Reverend John, we will go to Professor Alan Brill for his presentation. So Randy, would you like to kind of give us a short brief about what we learned about religious diplomacy from yesterday's session?
Yes. By the way, after those 2 speakers, we will have Andrew Skinner, Professor Andrew Skinner, that I'll introduce a little more detail before he speaks, to give his response and his own thoughts about friendship, of which he is a scholar. Yesterday, we had a great experience in getting into some of the more detailed aspects of what religious diplomacy might look like as an extension of dialogue, where serious issues of difference are faced in a way that allows for what we like to call heart and mind conversations. And certainly what we saw yesterday was Professor Mahallati's scholarly analysis of the complexity of having trust-building relationships. Everything from a ceasefire in war, or no, he started basically with the idea that that war itself has within it ethical standards that might be considered a form of human diplomacy. And then afterwards, ceasefires are a second level of human diplomacy. A third level might be forgiveness and moving on. Another level would be developing positive friendships. And he was very careful to show how difficult it is to go through these steps. And everything we're talking about today, I think, is in the context of understanding this is not idealism that we're talking about. We're talking about trying to influence real world on the ground problems by interjecting serious religious and ideological ideas and calling, if you will, those who hold them into the political and social life of the communities that are currently having conflicts, or communities that could, on the positive side, spur each other on to more good works in the world. So I'll just leave it there. We're excited to hear now from Bishop Chain on a more traditional Christian view of what friendship and religious diplomacy might look like going forward as an action in the world, and then Alan Brill, and then Andrew Skinner. So I'm so grateful that all of you were able to come together today, and we look forward to your presentations. Bishop, you're on.
Yeah, well, thank you very much, Randy. I'm sorry I have to leave. I have a board meeting that I just deserted, and so I have to go back to that board meeting at 11 o'clock Pacific time. But first of all, I want to thank the Baskerville Institute and Bauman and you for bringing us together to discuss this very, very important point. I'll just lead by saying I believe that the nation state diplomacy or sovereign diplomacy that has been in place for some time has not been very effective in dealing with so many of the crises that we have been facing in the world. And that my piece in the journey has always been that when I look at the core texts of the Old Testament and the New Testament and the Quran, I can find this convergence, which to me is kind of amazing, that literally calls us to be together, number one. Number two, to claim the commonalities that we have, and for the differences that we have through our relationships and friendship and trust, we are able to really bring to the table some significant realities that can make a difference and a change. And I think the Pope's visit is very much an indication of the effort to begin that process again, although many of us have been engaged in this kind of work for a long time. I really also believe in tolerance, but I'd like to start with a professor that I've worked with in the past. Diana Eck from Harvard has been somewhat of an influence in my work recently. And so I'd like to just kind of go through a very short piece of discussion or a presentation, and then we can chew on it. But I can say that it for me is extremely important. Pluralism really is an issue that really needs to totally embrace the concept of friendship that Dr. Mahalati has talked about, and I've known him for years. I've aged with Dr. Mahalati in a sense. Pluralism encourages sincere social interaction and the building of authentic relationships that cross the divide that too often exists between the people of God. And in order to engage in what I would call pluralism, one has to be engaged in embracing the deep understanding and relationship of friendship. And friendship is not new to diplomacy. The 21st century requires relationships based on mutual trust and respect, built on the shared philosophical and theological concepts. So it gives birth to long-lasting, authentic relationships that empower the hard work of intensive dialogue that has to go on. But true friendships can never really be broken. We cannot claim our identity as human beings without being claimed by others as their friend. And friendship doesn't require that religious beliefs or cultural identities be homogenized, which is, I think, important. Tolerance, too, is important in the way in which we should be doing diplomacy from a Western perspective, because it embraces nationalism and self-interest as it seeks to settle disputes. Nations and states are unwilling to cross the great divide that separates Oriental and Occidental thinking. I learned that a long time ago. Tolerating another does not respect the other's culture, ethnicity, or religion, and keeps nations and states divided. And tolerance has been pretty much the game of normal, what I would call sovereign or nation state diplomacy for a long time. An example is that if I say I tolerate you, that doesn't mean that I embrace or accept you as my equal. I choose not to seek your friendship, because a friendship will stand. I do seek your friendship because that's going to stand the test of time. And I would say that friendship is the height of moral excellence in human behavior. I was in Iraq about 2 years before the Pope made his visit to Iraq, and spent time and arrived in Najaf and spent three full days in Najaf, then went to Baghdad, and then visited refugee camps and met with religious leaders from every denomination that one could think of in Baghdad. We had a day-long meeting in Baghdad. And I also met with the leading Imam, if you will, in Iraq, and met with Sistani's team when I was there. And we talked about how important it would be if the Pope would be able to, or another religious figure like the Archbishop of Canterbury, somebody could come to Iraq and sit down and have conversation to build not only levels of communication and trust, but to look at the issues that were really not only dividing people, but killing people. And I can remember being in Baghdad, and you could hear the explosions of ordnance up away from that city. And to be frightened is an understatement. I mean, I've had some pretty tight places to be in, like so many of you, but to be in Baghdad at that time was pretty intense. ISIS was still pretty aggressive. That's just 3 years ago. And the hotel I was to stay in with my team on the night we were in Baghdad, when we met with the prime minister, and we were in the green zone, we were invited to stay in the guest house on that large campus. And on that very night, the hotel we were supposed to stay in was blown up by 2 car bombs, one that came in and exploded. And then when people gathered outside to deal with the horror of the people who were injured inside and outside, another car came down and exploded the whole front of the hotel. So there are risks involved, physical risks in environments such as that, which I think are being minimized to an extent. But the work that we've done has taken a long time, not just in Baghdad and in Najaf, but we have not been able to get our national representatives, our elected members to do anything about it. The Brookings Institution in Washington was an organization that we could work with, and I was involved with them for 7 years, working on the principles of interreligious engagement and diplomacy that would bring us to Doha every year for the US Islamic World Forums. And the last one that we had involved major religious leaders from the global community for the first time to sit down and have these kinds of conversations, and to begin that concept of conversation that can lead to not only trust and respect, but friendship. I don't know where we are right now in terms of the work that we've done. Sometimes I feel like I've taken one step forward and I've been caught in the sand of Pacific Beach here, and I can't get the other foot out. But I believe that the three Abrahamic faiths in particular have at their core root not only the ability to do this kind of engagement and to be at the table to be part of the conversation, but will find within their theological contexts a relationship that is binding that is binding. It not only calls us for our point, Luke 10, love one another as I have loved you. And I call you to engage because you are my friends. And so that teaching of Jesus is so empowering that for Christians, it means we have to do more than talk about love. We have to do more than talk about tolerance. We have to engage our lives in it. So I'm not so much a scholar as I am somebody who goes out on the road and meets with people, leaders. I cannot, it's just crazy in terms of the miles and the people that we've had conversations with very intently in Iran. And I must say that back in 2014, when we were having conflict between Hamas and Israel, the Israeli embassy in Washington was a wonderful partner. We worked through a lot of issues with them, and also with, we didn't deal directly with Hamas, but we worked directly with the authority. We were able to get all kinds of work done because of friendship and trust and mutual respect. And so we're at a point now where that's one of the flashpoints, but the other flashpoints we all know about. But how does the faith community and its leaders engage in that? And who are the leaders? I think that's the other question. Who are the people who are trained to do this work? So I'll be quiet. I have flashbacks when I think about the stuff that we've been doing and are doing right now with Luke 10.
Could you, if you wouldn't mind me just inserting a question for you, because I think the audience would like a little more context. Were you working as an Anglican bishop or an Episcopalian bishop? Were you working as part of a multi-faith diplomatic effort? In your years of doing this effort, what was your portfolio? What brought you in and gave you authority to speak?
I'm not sure if it was authority. I had done a lot of work with the Anglican Church whose archbishop is based in Jerusalem, because we have a hospital in Gaza that has been there for many years when the British were part of the equation. So I had an opportunity to travel back and forth between Gaza and the hospital, Al-Ali Hospital, and Jerusalem. And because I was an Episcopal bishop who was in Washington, D.C., the presiding bishop or head of the Episcopal Church globally said, I don't like to do this kind of work. I think you're there. This is a big part of your portfolio. You have to learn how to do this, and you have to do it for the denomination. And the first time that I ever even was engaged in it was when the former president of Iran, Mohammad Khatami, requested permission to come to the United States to speak, which he was not permitted. His permission was not granted. There was a concern that he might be able to talk about 1972 and offer an apology conceivably to the United States for parts of the revolution that were painful for us and for them. But the State Department said no, and I had a friend in the White House who was able to get a hold of President Bush, who was in Texas cutting brush at the time, and he gave permission for Khatami to come. Khatami did not talk about an apology. He spoke from the pulpit of Washington National Cathedral about Occidental and Oriental theology and the importance of finding the bridge that can connect them together to really begin to deal with addressing the issues that were a part of the entire region, not just Iran at that time. So that invitation he came, and then as he was leaving said, I want you to come to Iran and I want you to meet with so and so and so and so and so and so, which meant meeting with Christians and Jews in Iran, as well as an Anglican. I wasn't really that welcomed in Iran, if you know the history of what happened with Mossadegh and what have you. But at the same time, they found a sense of respectfulness in terms of the office that I held, but also finding a way to get Hatami to at least talk about religion and theology rather than the disconnect based on foreign policies or internal policies. That started it. And I found myself traveling to Lebanon, working in Egypt, back to Iran, the Ukraine. It's been a weird journey, if you want to call it that, all based though on the context of religious diplomacy, or looking at what the scripture calls me to do as a person and as a believer, to seek out and to reach out to people who are not like me, who may even dislike me. And I can remember when we were dealing with freeing the hostages in Iran out, not the hostages, but the hikers. But I had spent lots of back and forth diplomacy between Iran. I didn't represent the United States government. I didn't take money from the United States government. I am not a diplomat. I might not even be a very good bishop, but I have this passion to do the work of the book. And I remember sitting in Qom being grilled by members of the Council of Experts, who were the ones who picked the candidates to be on the dais for election as the president, saying, why should we even talk to you? We have nothing in common. And you never keep your promises. And I said, I'm not a politician. I'm not a diplomat. What I will tell you is we live on the food of compassion. And your teaching in the Quran is filled with compassion. So is the Gospels of Jesus. So are the great stories of the Old Testament with compassion and friendship. I mean, so if we're going to sit around this table and criticize one another about our politics or our countries or our disagreements, we're not going to get anywhere. But we certainly can find time to have some tea and talk about empathy and compassion and respect and trust. And if we can't do that, there's no way in hell or heaven that the forms of diplomacy that we have in play right now are going to do anything to free people in our jails in the United States and in your jails here in Iran. So it's your choice. What do you want to do? We had tea, and then we had the conversation.
That's fantastic.
Randall, if I may just intrude 1 second, I want to compliment Bishop Chain. And I have mentioned it in one of my book chapters on friendship about how many times he took risk, along with my late friend, Ambassador Bill Miller, to go to Iran, to intervene, to help, to have a wonderful conversation and effective, and ending up with the freedom of some of the prisoners. So he has an amazing record of religious diplomacy. In fact, I would say in one of the universities, there should be a chair for religious diplomacy in Bishop Chain's name to follow up on his legacy. And I really use this time to compliment what you've done, Bishop. It's historic. And thank you.
Well, the beginning began with you right after 9/11. And I'll never forget, nor will my wife forget, meeting you for the first time. I was brand new in Washington and didn't know anybody. I mean, I don't know how I was elected. I was a liberal from the West Coast who was known for causing trouble in his own denomination. And so I was elected, I think, because God has a great sense of humor, but maybe hopefulness. But I've always, those meetings with you, the meetings with you gave me an opportunity to look at what's possible. What can we do together? And I know when I was in Iraq, which was really a wonderful time, meeting with Sistani's people, the government wanted to know, tell us everything you can tell us about the meeting with Sistani's lieutenants. And if you get a chance to meet with them, tell us what that's all about. And the issue there was to talk about, you get that your country has done this and this and this and this, and it's, you just sit there. And but you don't respond and say, I hear what you're saying. But you've already made it very clear that your country needs to be rebuilt. You've made it very, very clear that there's a desire to engage in conversation that can lead to a diplomatic response that can be building for your country. We believe that. And so how do we go about that? And so what we planned was, first of all, to get a hold of the Pope, because they actually were hopeful that there would be an international leader, they said, like the Pope, the Holy Father, to come to Iraq and begin to understand the nature of the problem, but also begin to heal those who are considered in and outside of the ring of fellowship and friendship. And I'll never forget that conversation. They said, not to dismiss you, but we want somebody with a lot of authority. And would it ever be possible for the Pope to come? And we said, I don't know, we'll get a hold of our friends at the Pontifical Council for Interreligious Dialogue and connect with them and bring that invitation to our colleagues there. Cardinal Turan, who died about 4 or 5 years ago, I think, was a giant in interreligious work and diplomacy. And when he died, somewhat unexpectedly, it really created a really devastating experience for those of us who have been working with the Vatican.
Well, Reverend, I wanted to see your perspective on the Pope, Pope Francis. And he's got amazing, unique qualities. And first of all, I think he's planning to go to Lebanon. And then from there, he's planning to go to South Sudan.
That's, yeah.
And just another person from Vatican has told the Muslim countries that he will be back to Middle East again. He didn't mention where, but he's planning another major trip to Middle East. So in contrast, papal diplomacy goes back centuries, as you know. Papal diplomacy from Vatican has had a history of being a bridge between states, moving toward what you call Occidentalism, Orientalism. Do you think this Pope Francis, the number of issues that he's tackling, from climate change to immigration to dialogue, friendship, how do you see the impact he's making in the broader world and particularly in the Middle East?
I know the impact he has on the conservative elements of the Catholic Church. It's not a funny thing to say, but when we were in Rome for a 4-day conference, and we were invited to meet with him privately. And one of his handlers said, because Pope speaks some English, but he said, we really have to be careful here because this Pope is not very popular in your country. And I said, well, that's not true. I said, well, he has such a big heart, and he raises such big issues that the church has tried to avoid embracing, that we worry about him. We worry about his travels. And I can remember I was supposed to be leaving that conference to go to Iran, and I couldn't get I was having a hard time getting a visa to go into the country. It was a conference that I was involved in with some other leaders. And during this very short, condensed period of time, the Pope came by and took my hand. And all you had to do was to look into his eyes, and you could see this sense of compassion and care. And he mumbled under his breath, he said, "I pray for you. I know where you're going." And I thought, how the hell does he know that I'm supposed to go to Iran? 2 hours later, a courier brought my visa from the Iranian interest section, so I could get on a flight to fly through the Ukraine again and then go into Iran for this meeting. And the reason why he did that was that he understands how important it is for his role as the leader of the Catholic Church to be engaged in policies and work that can end the kind of dissension and violence that's been very much a part of the region for so long. You know, and my denomination talks about love all the time, but my response to that is love without engagement and action is simply nothing more than poetic prayer. It requires engagement, and we tend to be very much not wanting to do that in my denomination as a church. So I'll just put that out there.
Can I ask, since you're going to have to leave us in about 10 minutes or so, can I ask Alan and Andrew to ask you any questions they might have of you right now before I start throwing a couple of more at you? Alan and Andrew, do you have anything you'd like to ask Brother Cheney?
But I put them to sleep.
No, you didn't put us to sleep. In fact, your presentation, your remarks resonated deeply with me in a remarkable way. And you say, Scripture calls me to reach out to those who don't know me or even who don't like me. I am called to do the work of the book. A profound comment for me as a fellow Christian. To what extent does Scripture come to bear when you're involved in your conversations with others and doing the work that you've been called to do?
It's a great question. I think it really opens up the conversation that one would hope to have that hasn't happened. In other words, the fact that you're there, you're very clear that you may not have any answers, that you're very vulnerable. The purpose of being there isn't to fulfill some desire of your government. It is a matter of being there as a person who is committed to the teachings of Jesus, but at the same time embraces the commonalities that we share in our books. We are people of the book. Some say, whether it's correct or not, there's a scholar in Princeton who says that the Gospels are prototypical in a sense to the formation of the Quran. If you look at the Quran and you look at that piece of work, there's a possibility. I don't know, but there is this thing that separates us, and I think it's culture and politics. Politics is just, it's a hard deal. And, you know, I can remember meeting with the leader in Iran, and it was politics, 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 and getting hammered because I was from the West and I was from the United States. And I just said, I'm not a politician, and I'm not an ambassador, and I don't represent my government. I represent the beliefs and teachings of Jesus. And you also, I am sure, are motivated by and powered through the teachings of the Prophet and the Holy Quran. And those teachings are very important for us to continue this discussion. And there was a long silence. And then he began to talk about how can we build a bridge? How is a bridge built when we have politicians who have the hammers and the nails and the timbers? And so that led to lots of other work down the road. And I found that out in meeting in Iraq and also my time in Lebanon, and in my time in working with our people in Gaza and in Jerusalem and in Israel. I had a wonderful relationship with two ambassadors to the United States from Israel. And so we were able to sit down and work out stuff that our governments couldn't work out, I think. In terms of humanitarian care and concern for the other, we were able to work out those issues too, in terms of people who were injured on both sides and finding medical supplies to get into Gaza or whatever. I think it's possible to do that work, but you really gotta, you gotta really love the people you work with, and you have to find a way that you can exercise the power that God gives us to not only be engaged in communities of friendship, but to be engaged in a shared journey that is based on ultimately love. I mean, it's at the core of what we do. I mean, we use it all the time, but I hear it in my denomination all the time, and I wonder, where are you guys? You're not on the ground. You're not doing the work. I mean, it's important to pray. I understand that, but somebody has to get out there and do it. We don't have enough people to do it.
Thank you. I'm reminded of the Greek word agape,
Yeah.
of the different Greek words that it can be translated as love, and the one that Jesus uses, as you mentioned earlier, is agape, which is the ability to love someone, to feel affection for them, though they possess no quality of lovableness on their own. And you're one who is not only talks the talk, but walks the walk. So I express appreciation.
I'm not sure if I do that well at all. I mean, I always feel like I've failed. I mean, I really do. My big concern is who will follow you? Who's going to follow you, or who's going to follow me when I'm too old to get on an airplane, too old to climb into a car and get to the airport? I mean, who is going to do the work that has to be done? Who is going to take the holy word of God and put it on the ground?
On that point, Bishop, I'm haunted by one of your side comments when you first began, when you talked about the problem of finding interlocutors who have heft in the Middle East among the Muslim community. And this whole problem of authority speaking for a group. Do you have any hint of a future there, of what might be developing in terms of religious diplomacy and people who could engage in it, besides Sistani, who is also not going to be with us forever? What's happening over there from your point of view? And I cut in on Alan. Alan, if you have a question before is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. So Bishop, what do you think about that? Is there any kind of coalescing of leadership that could have an ongoing religious diplomacy besides Jafar Mahalati?
I think there are people, and I think there are people who are far better scholars than I will ever be, because I was a linebacker in college, so you should know that. But I think of the Grand Imam from Al-Azhar in Egypt. We invited him to Washington, and he came as part of the first Christian-Muslim summits. And then we were engaged with him when we were in Lebanon. And he's a big player. He has a very good relationship with the Vatican, and he is willing to sit down and have these kinds of conversations, and he can carry the freight. That's a guy who carried the freight. So that's somebody who is a Sunni and who has great influence on this Sunni community, broadly speaking. So that's one person. There are others. There are some wonderful scholars in Lebanon, believe it or not, who are kind of sidetracked and put in a corner. Christians and Muslims. There are also, I remember when we were in Rome, the Pope, when we had our conference there, absolutely it was mandatory to have one of his close friends from his country before coming to Rome. And he was a rabbi, and he said, this is where we have to be. We have to bring in people who are very smart, very committed, and can have these conversations and do diplomacy well. So his presence was, so he was there with Shias, Sunnis, Christians of different ilks, Orthodox, and representatives of the Vatican and the Pope and his people. And it was like, this is what life can be like. We can sit down at the table and have these conversations and disagree with one another and still respect each other, deeply respect each other, and care about them as friends. And if we can do that here, we have to find ways to do it beyond here and not be compromised by the politics that defines our nation and state.
Yes, well put.
Bishop, yesterday somebody asked, what is really the difference between secular diplomacy and religious diplomacy? And it crossed my mind that one of the major fields of difference is apology and forgiveness, that is well defined within the realm of religion and not defined in secular politics at all, or comparatively speaking. I wonder what are or have been the moments, memorable moments of apology and forgiveness in your experience of religious diplomacy, and that would be a great lesson.
I mean, that goes back in time. I can share that with you in terms of the work in Iran. You know, the first thing after, you know, the supreme leader took me to the woodshed for intervention in 1979. And prior to that, during the Mossadegh years, prior to that, I just said, I can't apologize to you for my country because I don't represent my country. But as a Christian, I can say to you, I apologize and my heart breaks for the way in which people from my country behave to make the journey so much more difficult for you. And that opens up the door right off the bat. It makes you very vulnerable because you're either going to get another broadside, or it opens up the opportunity to have the conversation that needs to be had. And the conversation doesn't end when you leave the room. I mean, we've been in touch. I've been in touch with him, the leader, ever since that meeting. And that's been a long period of time. And it hasn't often been a loving kind of thing. we call each other to task, or our cultures or our belief systems or our leaders to task. But we always come back to that common element of friendship and respect and in a sense, trust. The issue of nuclear weapons has been very much in those conversations as well, or weapons of mass destruction. And they are very tough discussions, but they are discussions that we need to have. And I wrote a foreword to a book, I can't even remember now. We can toast the earth and kill everything on it in 5 days or less if we make the wrong decisions. I don't know. I have great hope that things are going to get better. Madeleine Albright, who used to come to the cathedral a lot, would say, we would have these conversations about religious diplomacy, and she would go, nah. But then she said, when I wanted to be in the Foreign Service, and I wanted to get a good education, and my academic background was, and our training as foreign service officers was, don't engage in religion. That's not your job. Your job is to bring the message of the government to the people that you are called to serve. That's what you do. And because religion really should not have any place in the concept of engaging in foreign policy for our nation. Now that changed. I mean, I remember just before I left DC, we sat down and had a conversation. And she said, what? I think I should have had a better education.
Yeah, she's actually written a book on that subject.
Yeah.
Yeah, since then, right? And Doug Johnston's work on religion in diplomacy as an effect on political diplomacy. But no one is quite honed in an institutional and significant way on what we're calling religious diplomacy itself, and that's what we're hoping will happen as part of these conversations. I know you got to go. Does anyone have any comment they'd like to pitch to the bishop before he gets back to his ecclesiastical responsibilities?
Actually, there are philanthropic responsibilities this week with the foundation based in Minneapolis, but they do great work globally. And that's another thing. It's like having a discretionary fund of what, $8 billion? And you can work and deal with issues that have to do with community growth and development and the environment, and actually work on projects of reconciliation as well through that work. So.
Good.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Reverend John, for those wonderful stories and presentations. And we really look forward to continuing this discussion. I think we have a very active Pope, and he's not going to let us sit down and enjoy what we call a trip to the Scandinavian countries. So he's making sure that he's going to all the troubled regions of the world, and many, many young people that I've been in touch with from Iran, from Middle East, Muslim, Christian, Jewish, they're all enthralled with this Pope. They may not know what his message is or the meaning of his message, but they are enthralled with this Pope. And so we see it as our obligation to bring greater light and understanding to what he's doing and educate our new generation about the importance of this religious diplomacy. Well, thank you very much for joining us, taking time for your busy schedule to join us.
Well, thank you very much for doing this, because it gets kind of lonely out there in the cornfield. And the opportunity to bring scholars such as you have with you today. I am not a scholar, so you just need to understand that. But to bring people together to have these conversations is really a gift. And
Yes.
I honor that gift. And I'm so thankful that you've taken the initiative to do this. And Randy, you're also a very special person on this journey. And I want to thank you.
Thank you.
So
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Have
So
a great day.
thank you.
let me now finally get to Professor Burrell, who is the Cooperman-Ross Endowed Chair for Jewish Christian Studies at Seton Hall University. Alan teaches Jewish studies at the Department of Religion. He specializes in interfaith theology, Jewish mysticism, and contemporary Jewish orthodoxy. He is the author of a book entitled Judaism and World Religions, Christianity, Islam, and Eastern Religions. He has a very, very rich bio on the website. I don't want to take much of his time here, but we are very pleased to have him for this session to kind of give us his observation from, as he calls it, New Jersey, about what we see in the news about popes travel to the Middle East, talking about the Abrahamic religions, and are there any kind of precedents in the Jewish traditions for what the Pope is doing for the Christian tradition? So with that, we look forward to hearing your observations, Alan. Thank you for joining.
Okay. Thank you. Good day. Good evening. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to be invited. And after the bishop's talk, it's a hard act to follow. At this point, almost anything I say will not live up to his diplomacy. I'm a professor in New Jersey at Seton Hall University, a Catholic university, and you should know that almost every major Catholic university in America has a Jewish professor on the faculty in order to do Catholicism in the presence of the other, of Judaism. And that's over 40 schools. So the students are exposed to Judaism. I am also an ordained rabbi, or Orthodox rabbi of specifically the modern Orthodox variety, meaning I keep this strict in law, but I dress modern. And in terms of the externals, I am modern, less so than the law itself. My first background is a student of religious law, mysticism, medieval commentaries. And from there, I wound up after 9/11. Most of us have a very similar narrative. After 9/11, I found myself working full-time in interfaith, and that's what I teach now. But I'm not the person who's the politician. I don't meet the politicians. In fact, I got started in this being in the background. I was the person you drag along to do the speech writing, the re-editing. And even now, when you go on these delegations, I'm the person who's sent to the local university. I'm the one who's sent to the local madrasah. I remain the scholar who speak to the other scholars in a separate group while the politicians are speaking. It's a different place in the group dynamic. So I don't get to sit on the political dais. I get to meet in the side room with the other religious figures who are dealing with more theoretical issues, more textual issues to go forward. But we also then deal much more with questions of textbooks, questions of how do you move from my doctrines of exclusivism to more inclusivist and universal ideas. How do you do away with identifying your own biases within your tradition? Meaning things that are much more scholarly to deal with. I situate myself very much in New York, New Jersey, which for most people don't know is the largest Jewish city in the world. Okay, this creates a different level of where my Judaism is from. It's very much a New York Judaism. And I'm sorry I couldn't come yesterday because it was the Jewish holiday of Shavuot, which is the holiday that celebrates the giving of the Torah and the Jewish calculations. And so therefore, making me Orthodox, I wasn't going to be a part of this conference, but here I am today. Now, to the issues at hand, Pope Francis is a very good friend going back from Argentina days, Rabbi Abraham Skorka. The two of them wrote a book in Spanish together. They've been traveled together. They traveled together on many of these foreign visits. even to the Middle East. And Skorka gets to travel with the Pope on the plane, sitting next to him, and has a real insight in what he's talking about. So in some way, I'm going to start my talk by channeling Rabbi Skorka to give you the Jewish perspective as the Pope's fellow traveler. And in that, Rabbi Skorka points out how important he thinks these recent activities are, visiting Iraq and the Emirates, how important the documents that are being created, and how important they are for being heartfelt and actually changing things. Rabbi Skorka says he even keeps a copy of these documents framed in his house because he thinks they're going to lead us forward. Okay, from his point of view, they're seen as that important. He quotes Pope Francis as saying, in order to engage in this, we've got to lower our defenses, we've got to open the doors of our homes, and we've got to offer warmth. And Rabbi Skorka offers 5 points from his Jewish perspective on the Pope's initiative. First, Rabbi Skorka says we've got to put God at the center of the exchanges. So unlike the diplomatic approaches or the ones who said we kept it separate, he says the point for both him and Pope Francis is God is central, and we're calling people to share our spiritual journeys. We're not calling them for politics, we're calling them for a spiritual journey. It opens up open doors in a very different way. Yes, the politicians will do their thing, but this opens up doors if you're coming from an emphasis on God. 2, never try to persuade the other one or dissuade them. It's not about arguments, it's not about polemics, it's not even making the cogent arguments, but it's an invitation and trust. It's an invitation to be friends. 3, Rabbi Skorka says, and in this he's channeling Pope Francis, always be concerned with the needs of the present. And that's why Pope Francis is concerned with climate change, with indigenous people, with the Middle East. And those issues are forever going to be changing, but to always think in terms of contemporary issues. And I've seen them change. The issues in 1995 or in 1965 are not the issues now. Go with where people are at now. It's a pastoral activity. 4 is try to understand the religious perspective of the other. And that's important because where I sit as the more academic side, there's a whole brand new field of comparative theology, where you try to not compare and contrast, like making lists, or this is where the same and difference, but to try to put yourself in the mindset of the other faith. There's a certain act of understanding that goes on. 5th is, and finally, is Rabbi Skorka points out that we've also got to remain aware of the differences. We're not trying to ally differences or do away with differences in any way. And so therefore, Rabbi Skorka, gave a statement to the papers after he came back with Pope Francis from Abu Dhabi, that we're striving for authentic friendship and peace, and that dialogue is not an illusion, but it's the destiny of human existence. And this is an important activity. Now, Pope Francis codified his views in many of these documents in a document which the English name is Brothers and Sisters All, Fratelli Tutti, we're all brothers and sisters, in which Pope Francis emphasizes that we should dream together and that we should act as if we're a single family. And that what should inspire us to change, according to Pope Francis, is going to be courage, compassion, and boundary breaking solidarity. Pope Francis also points out that we've got to start from below. start on the individual, concrete, and local levels before thinking on the bigger ones. Now, this is in some way paradoxical because as somebody who in the last years has been part of the age of globalization, in that very much so, for example, the summer before COVID, I taught in Muslim schools in Indonesia, and very much the globalization element that I'm teaching in various Muslim schools in Indonesia, hopping over for a conference in Singapore, having just been back from other countries. But Pope Francis emphasizes start local and start individual, not start with, oh, where you're going and what the biggest organizations you are that you're addressing. And from a Jewish point of view, that becomes very much, you know, the ideas of someone like Professor Emmanuel Levinas is that it's about hospitality. We've really got to go out of our comfort zones. We've got to accept hospitality from others and give hospitality. And that rather than using words like dialogue, which go back to the 20th century, words like hospitality and seeing the face of the other may be more appropriate for the 21st century. And as I said, Pope Francis is talking about the importance of friendship and collaboration. But then when he gets down to the section on interfaith, and if you read it, and I'm reading it with very Jewish and very medieval Jewish eyes, is he notices he will go out of his way that even though we're working on friendship, we're still defending justice, because all of our medieval traditions still put great emphasis on justice. Pope Francis talks about the importance of promoting wisdom. We're all wisdom traditions also. He points the importance of human dignity, an important part of 20th century interfaith. Even if we don't all justify how human dignity works by the same justifications, Jews, Christians, and secular and Muslims may have different calculuses to explain it, but the human dignity we share. And he also gives us the traditional Catholic emphasis on love. So as much as we have friendship here and a 21st century friendship, in the end of the day, with my very scholastic eyes, I see he's still coming back to the doctrines of justice, wisdom, human dignity, and love. And so therefore, when I get sent to the side room, this is where those of us get started talking about where does it stand to prior documents and how do we go forward in that discussion, not just the political, but how do we now create common goals of wisdom, and to even teach people around the world that wisdom by its definition is a universal, that even if love may be seen, let's say for Catholics, as much more of a grace state, which it isn't, let's say, for Judaism, but understand where there are universals that transcend what we're bringing. If I go back now to the Jewish tradition, friendship plays a role in the Bible in different places. The Bible plays up the friendships of David and Jonathan in the book of Samuel, David and Barzillai in the book of Samuel, Ruth and Naomi in the book of Ruth. And the book of Proverbs, which is all about wisdom, has many statements on friendship, much about how being a friend is somebody who stands by you, how a friendship should not be based on rich or poor, because it's easy to have friends when people are rich, but they have to be true friends. The book of Proverbs points out it's not to the giver. And if you have many friends, you may have to worry because they're not going to be all sincere. And instead, you're trying for a true friendship. That's already the wisdom tradition. We move to the rabbinic tradition. And I must point out, for those who don't know the rabbinic tradition, Judaism does not define itself as ancient Israelite or the biblical religion. It defines itself as the rabbinic tradition, the role of the Mishnah, Talmud, Midrash, the works created from 200 BCE to 600 CE, with their emphasis on textual study, teachers, students, and engaging in study partners. And I'm going to start with a text from the 1st century, from a book of the Mishnah, Tractate Avot, sometimes called Book of the Fathers, which says, Joshua ben Parachia said, provide yourself for a teacher, get yourself a friend, and judge every man toward merit. So the rabbinic framing of it is you should find a teacher, you should learn wisdom and have someone you can learn from. 2, you have to have a friend. You don't exist as isolated monads. You have to have people who are going to bring you out to study with, to go back and forth. In some way, a spiritual friendship, but one of an intellectual spiritual friendship. And then finally, judge every man toward merit, or every person toward merit. You're not looking to be friends with every person, but you are looking to judge them all toward merit. You should be favorable to all of them. That's already a very basic sort of rabbinic statement. And it gets to jump ahead to a 19th century explanation of it. How great and wondrous, this is from Rabbi Abraham Weinberg in the 19th century. And he writes, how great and wondrous is the virtual love between friends and friendship, that they adhere together and they speak from heart to heart. You speak to friends as one soul, and thus leads you to humility, to joy, to repentance, to the delight in the performance of God's will, to soul searching, to overcoming temptation, to attain this world and the world to come, to awaken the heart, to attain the qualities of peace, the quality of truth, because the divine presence is only where there is peace and friendship. So that's the sort of commentaries you'll find on a line like that. Back to the rabbinic period, you have many statements, and I'm just going to give you a few that all speak like this. I have learned much from my teachers, but from my friends, I have learned more than from my teachers. Meaning, from engagement with others is where you actually learn. You know, as much as I go and, visit in a university in the Emirates or in Turkey or in Indonesia, trust me, as much as they think they've learned by meeting me, I've learned from meeting them, from their reactions, from their conversations, from their wanting to stay afterwards to talk to me, from their emails and Facebook conversations that they want to have with me afterwards. I truly do learn from it. And I'm actually one of those people who truly love social media, because it is a way to maintain friendships all over the world. Even in countries you can't get a visa to, you can still maintain continuous conversation with people. Another statement from the Talmud on friendship is one should never part from one's friends without exchanging words of Torah. You should always be thinking about the divine, talking about the divine, about religion when you do it. Not, oh, here's the religion and let's get to politics. But if you're going to do it, it's all about creating the friendships of religion. And in many levels, a true friend, is a learning partner, one that one can actually gain in this form of spiritual friendship. The Talmud has a story, by the story in the Bible of Job, that he lost everything and his friends traveled a distance to come comfort him. And the Talmud says, either you have friends like Job or give me death. The goal is to get true friends who will actually be true to you and sincere with you and work with you. Another rabbinic story on friendship is about Rabbi Zera, who was friendly with even lawless people that other people wouldn't be friendly with. And the Talmud says that Rabbi Zera rebuked the other sages because you shouldn't look at where they are now. You shouldn't look at their lawlessness, but you praise them for where they could be going or how they're changing. To see the positive and the merit within the people. Don't judge them as where they are now. To go to the Middle Ages, to go to Maimonides, the great Jewish sage of the 13th century. Some of your textbooks in Arabic or Persian will call him Musa bin Maimon. That's how he'll be phrased there, to give the short version of his name. And Maimonides says, man requires friendship all of his lifetime. That the nature of man, and the nature of people, is to be drawn to their traits and actions after your friends and associates. And you're going to act in the manner of your community. Therefore, a person must always associate with their friends and choose your friends to be righteous. And your friends should dwell among sages in order that you can learn from them and then from you. Okay? And jumping up to the 20th century, Emmanuel Levinas talks a great deal about friendship and confronting the face of the other. But Levinas, in some ways continuing the medieval tradition, says friendship, it always has to lead to justice. It always has to be your concern for what the other needs when you confront the other, because responsibility is unlimited. Your responsibility for your friends is unlimited, infinite, and prior to any consciousness. My responsibility to the other is proximate, and the proximity of the neighbor exalts and elevates me in the literal sense of the term, meaning it inspires me to assume responsibility for them. But, and I'm not going to go into this, Levinas does warn in one of his early 1930s essays that sometimes if you force fraternity and friendship on people, it could backfire. And he comes out how much of the fraternité of the French Enlightenment forced on people could backfire into a rejection of it, and that people wouldn't want to continue with it if it's not coming from a sincere place and it's coming from a national top down. And this is where Pope Francis becomes important and rather sharp in a age of globalization. You start locally, you don't have the nation saying you're all going to be friends and we're going to impose fraternity. It has to start on a local level, and that he did bring out quite early. I'm going to turn mystical because that was in some ways my first life. Rabbi Abraham Isaac Cook, giving us a pietistic and mystical approach to friendship, and one that's reflecting his own personal experiences. And he says that we should have a joyful gladness and internal affection to every creature, a faithful friendship to all beings, and a devoted love to all levels. Friendship to family, friendship to friends, friendship to nation, to mankind, friendship to animals, friendship to vegetable, and to all that is and exists, should be engraved, as in engraved on the heart, with all the fullness of righteousness in the inheritance of the heart. Or to give you something in a much more personal vein from him also, I love all creatures. In no way will I change my quality internally. For everything I find favor and a positive aspect. Literally for everything, and the light of God will appear upon all, and his compassion is upon all his creatures. So therefore we are to be friends with all creatures. And I'm now going to conclude a question that was asked before we start. to cite Chief Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks, who's the former Chief Rabbi of the British Commonwealth. He passed away right before COVID in the beginning of 2020. And he wrote a famous book, Dignity of Difference, right after 9/11, which became a worldwide bestseller among all religions, because he, in many ways, captured that moment of 2001, 2002 for many of us, in the ways Pope Francis may be doing it now in 2019 through 2021. But Chief Rabbi Sacks was very involved in interfaith. And for most of these things, he would be the Jewish representative because he had a silver tongue and an amazing ability to write well. And the fact that he had the political connections to the House of Lords and to European governments to make progress is for Chief Rabbi Sacks. Just because we believe we are blessed does not mean others are not also blessed and worth just as much. Now is the time for Jews, Christians, and Muslims to say what they failed to say in the past. We are blessed, and to be blessed, no one is to be cursed. God's love does not work that way. Today's God is calling us, Jew, Christian, and Muslim, to let go of hate and the preaching of hate. And at last, as brothers and sisters, true to our faith and blessing to others, regardless of their faith, honoring God's name by honoring his image, humankind. Sacks also understood that fidelity to one's faith need not involve an adversarial attitude to people of other faiths. Sacks taught that to build bridges and friendship and to come together. He helped us see that working together is a much more powerful force than working alone. Because at the end of the day, for Chief Rabbi Sacks, God is greater than any religion. And we appreciate the religiosity of others' religions and see God's presence in them. One of the ways God surprises us is by letting a Jew or a Christian discover the trace of God's presence in a Buddhist monk, a Sikh tradition of hospitality, or the graciousness of Hindu life. And he concludes, don't think we can confine God to our own categories. God is bigger than any religion. And if anything, this forum is going to help us foster that through friendship and discussion.
Thank you very much for that wonderful presentation and the conclusion. I love from late Rabbi Jonathan Sacks. I kind of read his book, Dignity of Difference, several times, and I'm amazed by the title he put for his book.
Yeah.
And so I'm so glad that you concluded that, and you did a great job of summarizing how this current Pope also embodies those Jewish traditions that has kept us going. So,
but Rabbi Sorka put the terms, didn't use the Christian terms. He put it, if you listen closely, in very Jewish terms when he summarized the Pope.
Yes. Well, thank you. With that, we go to Andrew for his comments, and then after Andrew's comments, we open it to the audience. Go ahead, Andrew.
Andrew Skinner is a professor at Brigham Young University. He's been the dean of religious education there for a long time. And among the Latter-day Saints, that's not a small job. They have one major university, which is, I think, still the largest church university in the United States, probably over 30,000 students. And not all Latter-day Saints think the same. He had to herd the cats in a sense, and did a good job of developing Christian and Latter-day Saint theology and history. He got his master's at Harvard, and then went on to get his PhD in history. His focus mainly has been as a scholar on New Testament studies, but in recent years, he has also focused on friendship coming out of the Latter-day Saint Christian tradition, and has written probably the best monograph on that subject. as well as other books that I won't go into right now. I'll just let him speak, but he's admired among his people, and he is, as you'll see, a very humble but bright star to engage in this dialogue. So thanks, Professor Skinner, for joining us.
Well, thank you. I didn't deserve that gracious introduction, but then again, I got the flu a couple of months ago, and I didn't deserve that either. So I'll just happily take your introduction. My position reminds me of the old joke about professors at a symposium. The last professor gets up and says, everything that should have been said has been said. It's just that I haven't had a chance to say it. And that's the way that I feel today. I truly love and enjoyed very much listening to Reverend Cheney, I'm not quite sure the correct pronunciation, and also Professor Brill. Professor Brill, I have to tell you that you make me homesick for my graduate school days. My old teachers, Rabbi Stanley Wagner of blessed memory, and Professor Raphael Yaspa. And Professor Yaspa was very keen on reminding me that Jewish scholars and leaders in ages past laid a meaningful foundation for interfaith dialogue, and you have brought that back to our attention and a call to move forward. And I suppose if there is a theme that I see in the two presentations, excellent presentations today, it is this idea of being called to do something more than talk theoretically about it. And I have a comment or two about that later on. As you were talking about medieval Judaism, one of the individuals that came to my mind was the great medieval Jewish authority whom you mentioned, Rabbi Moses Maimonides, who's known by the acronym Rambam, whose distillation of Jewish thoughts regarding where we all hope to end up became a majority view, or the view of normative Judaism, if I can use that term. And that statement, familiar to all of us: the righteous of all nations have a portion or a share in the world to come. And I believe that that's what we're all after. Comments about friendship and linking it to paradise yesterday by Professor Mahalati really resonated with me. Paradise wouldn't be paradise without friends and friendship. And I've appreciated actually being included in this very impressive group, professors Bakhtiari and Mahalati and Peterson and Randy Paul and Professor Brill and Reverend Cheney. Thank you for this incredible experience. I have pages and pages of notes that I think will help me move forward in my quest for a meaningful interfaith dialogue and cultivation of friendships. I appreciated Professor Brill's comments about the connection between Rabbi Skorka and Pope Francis, and he makes reference to Rabbi Skorka in his visit of 2014 to the Holy Land as a very, very close friend. And that helps, Professor Brill's comments helps me to fill in the gap and to understand more fully the connection that Pope Francis feels with Rabbi Skorka. And I appreciated the 5 points that you articulated, which I think serves as an important foundation, one of the foundation blocks as we move forward. And again, your Professor Brill's emphasis on how friends and friendship ministers to our understanding And we often learn life's valuable lessons from friends, and true friendship becomes so critical in our own development. Professor Brill, I must tell you that as you were speaking, my mind went to, I think it's a somewhat famous story in the Talmud, excuse me, about Rabbi Abraham, about Father Abraham, who meets a stranger and invites him into his tent to share a meal. And if I remember the story correctly, Father Abraham learns that the man in his tent is a fire worshiper. He's a heathen. And so Abraham dismisses him from his tent and goes to bed feeling confident that he's done the right thing, because he is a not just a believer, but a defender of the God Jehovah. And during the night, as he's sleeping, he has a dream, excuse me, in which God comes to him and says, Abraham, Abraham, I have been tolerant of that ignorant man for all of these many years. Could you not have suffered him one night? And that's a powerful lesson about one aspect of religious diplomacy and what we're trying to accomplish. And again, I appreciate Professor Brill's articulate way of reminding me of lessons that I have learned in my own educational experience. Even though my focus in later years has been New Testament and intertestamental Judaism, my degree, my PhD, is actually in European and ancient history with a focus in Judaism. And I must tell you that I feel very comfortable with you and wish that I had had you as a professor, to be quite honest. My own thoughts about Pope Francis's visit to the Holy Land in 2014 have brought to the fore, I think, important lessons for our webinar these last 2 days. As I don't know if it's been mentioned, but everybody's aware that Pope Francis's visit to the Holy Land in 2014 was preceded by only 3 other popes in history: Pope Paul VI in 1964, Pope John Paul II in 2000, and Pope Benedict XVI in 2009. And so Pope Francis's visit to the Holy Land came exactly 50 years after Pope Paul VI's visit. And Pope Francis makes reference to this. It was an important milestone, I think, and was probably not chosen, the year 2014 was not chosen accidentally. One notes that 2 of Pope Francis's successors went to the Holy Land under a bit of a cloud, we might say. You may remember that only weeks before Pope Paul II arrived in the modern state of Israel, he was visited at the Vatican by Palestinian Authority Chairman Yasser Arafat. And at that time, an accord was signed by the Vatican with the Palestinian Authority, which, quote, cautioned Israel to refrain from unilateral decisions affecting Jerusalem, which it, referring to the accord or the document, called morally and legally unacceptable, unquote. This accord upset the Israeli government, who said that the agreement was interfering with negotiations between Israel and the Palestinians, and they regretted that. At least that was the statement issued by the Israeli Foreign Ministry. So the Foreign Ministry called the representative of the Holy See in Israel, Monsignor Pietro Sambi, if you remember that name, and he was asked to meet to discuss the matter. And the concern was expressed but nevertheless, the government of Israel welcomed the Pope's visit. And that is an impressive example to me of what we've been discussing, the ideas that were presented yesterday, the concepts of dynamic, peaceful tension, of collaborative contestation, if you will, and also how when the desire for true friendships are tested, you can tell that they remain true friendships, and this was a test. And so I was grateful to understand that it is possible for groups of people to disagree with one another. And that came about as Pope John Paul went to the Holy Land. And Pope John Paul's visit, as you may remember, in 2000 was more warmly welcomed than some people, I think, had expected. And that Pope John Paul's visit actually highlighted improved relations between the State of Israel and the Vatican. And one of the important points of John Paul's visit that I think was in the mind of Pope Francis, the current Pope, was Pope John Paul's asking for forgiveness on several occasions for the wrongs that Christians had inflicted on Jewish people. And we have mentioned today, in fact, given a bit of an emphasis on this idea of seeking repentance and forgiveness as one of the foundation stones for friendship and, quite frankly, religious diplomacy. Maybe we don't see enough of that. Pope Benedict's visit in 2009 drew a more, shall we say, lukewarm response from the Israelis. Pope Benedict said that he was making this pilgrimage to the Holy Land to pray for and work for, quote, the precious gift of unity and peace, unquote. During Pope Benedict's childhood, he had been conscripted briefly into the Hitler Youth movement, and this meant that some observers, both in Israel and outside of Israel, were watching and listening very carefully to what went on. And after his visit to the Holocaust Memorial, some official concern was expressed that maybe Pope Benedict's speech there glossed over the Nazi genocide. At least that was reported in the newspapers. And I've over the years, I've made a point of keeping various clippings from newspapers, the Jerusalem Post and other newspapers that report these visits. And so I have appreciated being able to go back and review that. The point is that, again, a solid enough basis of friendship had been established that Pope Francis was able to go and to, as one newspaper reporter put it, tread on diplomatic eggshells at virtually every step. And ultimately, I think most people agree that Pope Francis's visit was a success. He went hoping to accomplish several things in 2014, including, among others, the hope of awakening the Catholic world to the difficult situation of Arab Christians, not just in the Holy Land, but throughout the Middle East, obviously to further relationships between Roman Catholics and the Greek Orthodox community, and also to strengthen bonds between the Jews and the Christians. And I believe that he was successful because he employed some of the very principles of friendship and religious diplomacy that we have been talking about during this seminar. In my point of view, critical to the success of Pope Francis's visit to the Holy Land in 2014 and then later to other places in the Middle East was the Pope himself. And this causes us to focus on something that I think we have mentioned, but perhaps not emphasized, and that is the necessity of a forward-looking leader who recognizes the importance of the divine principle of friendship and the requirements of religious diplomacy, including self-sacrifice, patience, and hope. And my sense is, I have never met the Pope and have not had those important and impressive connections that Reverend Cheney and Professor Brill have. But my sense is that this is a man who is filled with hope, a characteristic, I think, of true friendship. We have lived in the Middle East on 6 different occasions as part of my assignment at the university to go and help staff the BYU Jerusalem Center. We take students to other countries, including Egypt and Jordan, and several years ago, even to Syria. And my wife and I have made it a point to conduct our own informal survey. And the question that we ask young people on purpose, and these are young people between the ages of, say, 20 and 30, in the Arab community, in the Palestinian community, in the Jewish community, these young people, what's your greatest concern for the future? I just gave it away. What's your greatest concern for the future? And inevitably, they will say, our greatest concern is lack of hope and no leadership to bring us together. That's been a very, very enlightening exercise. And again, this has been an informal kind of a survey that we've taken, but it gives us a sense of what's going on among the rising generation: lack of hope and no unifying leadership, or leadership that unifies us. And my sense again is that this is something that this current Pope brings to the world scene. That he has made personal sacrifices in his own style of living, has changed the atmosphere in the Vatican as to the way that it does business, that it cares about all people of all different religious persuasions. And it's this forward-thinking leadership based on friendship that I think has been the most impressive to me. One of the challenges that the Pope knows very well exists, not just in the Holy Land, but in the Middle East, is that Christianity in the Middle East is in retreat. Some of you may remember seeing this issue of the National Geographic, and this is a decade old, and things have not gotten any better, but talks about how Christianity is in retreat, and so that's an issue that I think Pope Francis has very much in mind, and we have statistics to back this up. When the state of Israel was first formulated, 20% of the population of Jerusalem was Christian. And now it's around 2%. And this seems to be the case throughout the Middle East. And so I think one of the concerns is that we do need a strong Christian voice among the other two religions of Father Abraham to arrive at solutions that will make a difference, a true difference in the future. One of the emphases that I take from the present Pope is the emphasis that he really believes that friendship, if it's true friendship, must last through grave challenges. And here I cite some well-known figures who talk about this very issue, that friendship, in order to be genuine friendship, must be able to withstand challenges and disagreements. Shakespeare, for example, through his character Cassius in his play Julius Caesar, says, quote, "A friend should bear his friend's infirmities." The Greek biographer Plutarch reflected on this aspect of friendship, and he said, quote, "Prosperity is no just scale. Adversity is the only balance to weigh friends." And then the ancient Athenian dramatist Menander, who lived in the 4th century BCE and who was one of the most popular writers of antiquity, said, quote, "As gold is tried in the furnace, so friends are tried in adversity." And I have come to believe that that is the test of true friendship. And I have appreciated very much the emphasis that's been given to that concept in beginning with Randy's opening statements and at different times throughout our discussions. I'm not a Roman Catholic. I am not lobbying to have Pope Francis canonized, but my observation is that Pope Francis speaks with the ring of authenticity because he has demonstrated these qualities of hope, of patience, of self-sacrifice. He's foregone personal comfort because he believes in the divine principle of friendship. And his personal behavior has led the way to make a difference in the world of diplomacy. And again, I think that that's an emphasis that maybe we could spend more time on. What's the effect of one individual on religious diplomacy? We have a good starting point with Pope Francis. I was interested, and I'll conclude with these two quotations. I was interested in Pope Francis's discussion when he visited the two chief rabbis of Israel in May of 2014. He starts out in an interesting way. He says, "Dear brothers and sisters," and right away you have to appreciate the divine but yet global perspective of this leader. "My dear brothers and sisters." And then he goes on to say the following: "As you know, from the time I was Archbishop of Buenos Aires, I have counted many Jews among my friends. Today, two friends who are rabbis are here with us. Together we organized rewarding occasions of encounter and dialogue. With them, I also experienced significant moments of sharing on a spiritual level. In the first months of my pontificate, I was able to receive various organizations and representatives from the Jewish community worldwide. Together with the numerous initiatives taking place on national and local levels, these testify to our mutual desire to know one another better, to listen to each other, and to build bonds of true fraternity. This journey of friendship represents," and this is a continuation of the quote, "this journey of friendship represents one of the fruits of the Second Vatican Council. I am convinced that the progress which has been made in recent decades in the relationship between Jews and Catholics has been a genuine gift of God, one of those great works for which we are called to bless his holy name. Again, that idea of we're called to do this work. And then he quotes Psalm 136, give thanks to the Lord of Lords, for his love endures forever, who alone has wrought marvelous works, for his love endures forever. And I follow that with a statement from a man of my own religious tradition, whose name is Brigham Young. If you know anything about the history of Utah and Salt Lake City, you'll know the name Brigham Young very well. Brigham Young said the following, quote, let us have compassion upon each other and let the strong tenderly nurse the weak into strength, and let those who can see guide the blind until they can see the way for themselves. Let us be just, merciful, faithful, and true. Let Latter-day Saints, but we could substitute, let all of us learn that the weaknesses of their brethren are not sins. Let us be patient with one another. And so this webinar has been very rewarding to me, and I'm grateful, honored, and elated to be associated with such truly profound thinkers about the issue of friendship, and have made a commitment personally to ramp up my game, to step up my game, to do what I can do in my sphere of existence, what I'm called to do in terms of building friendship and truly listening to those of different persuasions. And I feel like that's what our presenters have done. So thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you so much, Professor Skinner, and thank you for that wonderful summary of your observations, which were so historically apt and also so much prevalent today. Every word you mentioned, even the conclusion of Brigham Young advice, applies to all of us, whether we are Muslims, Jews, Christians, no matter what faith. But those wisdom and that word of advice from Brigham Young truly was a good conclusion. We have, Randy, if you allow me, we have several questions from the audience. Could we address a couple of those questions and then you wrap it up? So let me go back to one audience member who has asked the following. I think justice is the most problematic requirement of the Pope. And justice ties into dignity in the political arena. Wars and genocides are waged brandishing justice. Slights spill over to indignity, and then injustice and wars resulting in ethnic cleansing of minorities by the majority. So how can the Abrahamic religions find common ground on the pillars of justice and dignity? Alan, would you like to take that?
Sure. So I wasn't going to critique the topic. I don't think we should really, friendship is one thing, but if you've noticed my talk, I kept slipping in justice about as often as I could without changing the topic. I do think justice is a talk. And as another one of the questions pointed out, Pope Francis is not very good at cleaning up the theological and social science structures, and then leaves it to us to sitting down with Cardinal Casper and Cardinal Terrain and others to then actually working out where justice and human dignity play a role. He'll just get up there and do his friendship talk, but it leaves others to really then say, where's this change catechism? Where does this change Catholic doctrine? Where's it change Jewish and Islamic going forward? Pope Francis can be very, in many ways, John Paul II and those he appointed and those appointed by Pope Benedict were much more brass tacks in ways that Pope Francis can sometimes not be. On the other hand, we've kind of lost in modern American English, human dignity has been whatever, it's no longer from its mid 20th century religious perspectives in which Catholics are coming from Maritain and Jews are coming from Rene Cassin and others, meaning we've moved very far from a quantified moment to argue in that. So that's when I have to be in the side room saying, where do we go from it? But at the same time, as much, Pope Francis has a quality that Pope Benedict didn't. Pope Benedict, if you remember, had some very unchoice words in his Renenberg speech about Islam. And then it was left, for example, since you brought up the Pope visiting the chief rabbis of Israel, Chief Rabbi Shlomo Amar, who is a fluent Arabic speaker and writer, because he is coming from, I think, Iraq. He actually wrote a letter to various imams apologizing for Pope Benedict, that I'm on your side because, you know, we all are respected religions of one God. And in that sense, you know, don't put everything in as if it's okay, it's just the Pope, and therefore that's all we need. We actually have to go forward and talk about justice and human dignity. And I'm going to close with a certain pedanticness that only a professor knows. The story about Abraham meeting the fire worshipers is actually a Christian story. It's actually both Jews and Muslims following Abraham. If someone shows up to you and they need to be fed, you feed them before speaking theology. I've been offered some amazing hospitality around the Islamic world with an amazing sense of being welcomed in before we say two words other than greetings. But it was actually, the story you told is by Ben Franklin and Jeremy Taylor and other Enlightenment figures that wanted the Christian Protestant world of their time to be more open. And that's actually a story that a dream had to come in order to be more open to the future. It's a very famous story. It's not in the Talmud. It's not in a Jewish source. It's a modern Western story.
Thank you.
That's interesting because my teachers always presented it as a Jewish story. My Jewish teachers.
Yeah, I understand.
But I appreciate that clarification because I have not been able to find it.
If I may have a comment on this brilliant question, an important question. First of all, I'm fascinated by a presentation by Professor Briel and Professor Skinner. Really learned a lot from both gentlemen. I think this question actually establishes the foundation of the second round of webinars and questions that we have to address, because now we need to go to a higher level of differentiation, for example, between love and friendship. To give you just one hint, Hannah Arendt, a political philosopher, is saying that love belongs to the realm of private life and should not come to the public, whereas friendship has to come to the public and is the foundation of democracy. Going back into Islamic tradition, Al-Ghazali, for example, is saying that friendship should be based on justice. But coming to the 21st century, Sybil Schwarzenbach, a scholar of friendship, is saying that our justice should be more friendly. And therefore, we have a whole web of concepts and ideas that need to be differentiated in order to be effectually brought into religious diplomacy. By differentiating and understanding the limits and the realms of love, friendship, justice, mercy, compassion, and all of those terminologies that are loaded with important concepts. Some enjoy some levels of authority, some are equal. Their relationship with liberty, their relationship with equality. All of these equations now come out. And I think this is a good foundation for the next level of our conversations. Thank you.
Absolutely. Randy, you're muted.
First of all, how formal are we with our time?
We are almost done. So we kind of, I think we have reached a conclusion. So we can stay another 5 minutes.
Okay.
Our webinar recordings, yes.
Then I'll do a congressional move, and I will cede my 5 minutes to the interlocutors to have a conversation with each other with this simple question. Jafar, Alan, and Andrew, what question might be on your mind right now for each other? We've had one that the audience has brought, and I apologize to the audience that we don't give them more time, but at this point, I'd really like to hear if you have a question for each other. Jafar's laid out there what he would like to see in the next conversation that we have. What do you have to say to each other? I'm just grateful that you came and was part of this. Thank you. I'm over.
If I may raise one element, one question is that, are we conscious that the honorific title of the founder of Abrahamic faith is the friend, Al-Khalil? And what is the significance of this name actually in all three traditions? So this is my question.
That's very good.
Yes, the friend of God. That is a very profound statement that you brought out there, because even I would say in Islam, God has no equals. And yet, how can a friend if anything, is your equal? So that's a very profound theological question you're bringing up there.
Very important. Okay, Alan.
My question is, how do we get more people involved, more people listening, more time for discussion between us and the audience? I have less with the two of them and much more for broader. It would have been nice to talk to people who are, listening in for half an hour. It would have been nice to have, 5 times the people attending this. That's really the question for me going forward.
Good. Well, we will definitely. It is a kind of a difficult time zone in month of May. Universities are all closed. We usually have in month of April, March, by far larger student participations. And so I think another future structuring of our webinar must include the students from different universities here and other campuses, because I think it is important, as you said, both. We need to reach to the younger generation. We need to kind of not speak to each other, but speak in a way that they understand.
Can I add on that, since we are informal friends here, could we get the questions that were not brought up and give those questions to Jafar, Alan, and Andrew and allow them to respond by email?
Yes.
I think that would be a courtesy.
Yes, we will get a snapshot of the questions on the chat room, and we will send it to all of you. We will also send a completely cleaned, edited version of both sessions to all of us. And we will love to continue our discussions, and we will love to have you again in the future webinars and also the conferences that are being planned now that we do plan to get engaged. So again, on behalf of the Civic Friendship Initiative, the Sterling Foundation that has founded us and kind of supported us, we're grateful to them because they were really the people who saw what we are discussing and they stepped forward. So I want to thank our sponsors. Also, I want to thank John Widtsoe Foundation, who also helped us sponsor it. And Utah Valley University was involved here, and 2 great professors from Brigham Young University, Andrew Skinner and Dan Peterson, who also joined us and brought us the blessing of having their knowledge for this discussion. Well, thank you very much.